House of the Dragon Season 3 is upon us, and I think it's a good time to remind everyone that this whole dance is Viserys' fault, and not just for what you think. What's good, beautiful people? It's your boy, Chrislyn Logue, and I'm your new favorite therapist. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I break down mental health themes from movies, TV shows, and other forms of pop culture. In my videos, I try to make mental health accessible, real, and something that we can learn from. So like, comment, subscribe, share with someone else who you think might find it interesting. Now, as I said, this whole dance is Viserys' fault. You might be thinking, duh, of course it is. We all saw how he never intervened in the way that he should have when he was alive. Yes, that's true, but I want to get into why he never intervened, and it's not just because he's conflict avoidant. He is, but that's only a part of the problem. In this video, I want to dig in deeper mentally and emotionally as to why it's his fault. For me, it comes down to two things that were driving him from the moment he became king. The first is guilt that he never processed. Guilt about Rhaenys, guilt about his wife Emma, guilt about Rhaenyra, guilt that just kept accumulating, but he never actually dealt with. The second is something I'd call legitimacy anxiety, or his anxious energy around proving that he was the rightful king, even though he didn't do anything to earn being king. Those two things fed into each other so much, especially in the early part of his rule, that it led to the Dance of the Dragons, and I'm going to tell you why. So, spoiler warning for the show and possibly for the books. You've been warned. Let's get into it. All right, so we have to start with how Viserys actually becomes king. King Jaehaerys has no direct male heirs because they all died, so a council comes together to decide who should ascend the Iron Throne. It's between Viserys and his older cousin Rhaenys. The older is important because it meant that she had a stronger claim to the throne, but was bypassed, and Viserys was named simply because he was a man. You know, patriarchy. In the scene where he's named heir, he looks at Rhaenys with a somewhat sheepish look on his face. Almost like when you catch your son using a chair to grab cupcakes from the top of the refrigerator. Anyway, that look with that tinge of guilt was Viserys acknowledging that it should have been her. Kind of reminds me of when Macklemore won Rap Album of the Year instead of Kendrick Lamar, and he wrote a tweet or something saying that it should have been Kendrick, not him. Same type of guilt. Another thing that's important about how he becomes king is the fact that he was picked by a council, which puts an asterisk on his kinghood. This makes him feel as though he has to prove himself to be the worthy and rightful king. So we have some guilt he feels about being selected over his female cousin who had a stronger claim, and the start of that anxious energy around having to prove himself. Both of these things will affect some of his decisions and behaviors later, which we'll get into. I think it's important to note that guilt is not the same as accountability. You can feel guilty about something and still benefit from it. You can feel guilty and still do nothing to change the conditions that produced it. And that's exactly what Viserys does. He could have said and done a lot of things once he became king to change the culture and belief around women's leadership. He could have done some things policy-wise, appointed Rhaenys to the small council, punished people who dismissed her claim. He could have done anything, but he didn't. Instead, and this is a part that I think is so important, he allowed the queen who never was to become Rhaenys' accepted title. It became a running joke. Sometimes the joke was made in his presence. He could have shut it down, but he didn't. And the reason he didn't shut it down or do anything with his power to change the narrative around Rhaenys' claim was because that asterisk on his kinghood and him feeling like he had to prove himself. Had he said or done something, it would have made that asterisk shine. People would have been questioning if he should have been king or if he was a good king, and he couldn't have that. So he may have been protecting his appointment as king, but he actually was furthering the message that female rule was something to be mocked and disregarded, which obviously comes into play later. The guilt around Rhaenys was an appetizer. Let's get into the guilt entree. Emma Arryn. Her death and the guilt that followed put Viserys on a bad path. But before we get into Queen Emma's death, I want to talk about something that happened just before it because it tells you exactly who Viserys is going into that birth chamber. Emma's pregnant, and Viserys, before the child is born, before they even know the sex, has already planned a tournament to celebrate his son and heir. Not his child, his son and heir. He's already certain. He tells Emma, there's a boy in the queen's belly. I know it. When she gently points out that there's no way to predict the sex, he doubles down. This child is a boy, Emma. I'm certain of it. Now, I want to be fair to him here. He and Emma had experienced devastating losses. One baby lost in the cradle, 2 stillbirths, 2 pregnancies that ended before their term. That's 5 losses in 10 years. After that kind of sustained grief, there's something understandable about clinging to hope, about refusing to entertain the worst. Sometimes optimism is a defense mechanism, a way of not living in fear every single day. I get that, personally and professionally. But he wasn't just hoping for a son. He already decided he was getting one. He planned a party. That level of false certainty is magical thinking at best and dangerous at worst. Because then Emma goes into labor. It's brutal and prolonged. The maesters bring Viserys terrible news that the baby is breech, Emma's failing, and there's a choice to be made. They can attempt a C-section to save the child and almost certainly kill her, or they can let labor take its course and likely lose them both. Without telling her what's going on or asking her what she wants, Viserys chooses the C-section. And this is the part the show doesn't let you look away from, and neither will I. It's against her will. She's in that bed screaming no, as he has them proceed anyway. He even holds her down while they do the procedure. All against her will. I want to sit with that for a second. I think it's easy to frame this as a tragic, impossible choice, but I don't think it was all that impossible. He chose wrong. He made that wrong choice against Emma's will because he needed a male heir to prove he was the rightful king, because kings produce heirs. That desperate need to prove himself king overrode his love for his wife, his ethics, and his wife's bodily autonomy. Yes, she may have died anyway, but there's a huge difference between her dying in childbirth and forcibly performing a C-section that kills her. And the son he sacrificed his wife for doesn't survive the day. The guilt from this isn't run-of-the-mill guilt. Nah, it's capital B, big guilt. The kind that can wreck your life and the lives of people around you if it's not processed in a healthy way with support, honesty, and time. But he didn't process it. He lightly glossed over it, and he tried to make up for it. So, to recap, him needing to prove he was the rightful king caused him to make a terrible decision, basically killing his wife, which led to some wild guilt that he's going to try to make up for. Sheesh. After Emma's death, Viserys tries to make up for the guilt, particularly with Rhaenyra. I'm not sure he told her what happened in the birth chamber or apologized for that, but he does apologize to her for wasting all those years wanting a son. Then he names her his heir. Now, I do believe Viserys genuinely loved Rhaenyra and genuinely believed in her. He even started prepping her. But this was really him trying to attempt to atone for his multiple guilts. He's trying to right the wrong done to Rhaenys and the fact that he didn't do anything after that wrong by giving the same opportunity to another woman. He's trying to make amends to Emma by honoring what she gave him. He's also trying to resolve the guilt from the birth chamber. I mean, he literally killed her mother over the hope of a boy, so he chooses Rhaenyra. But it wasn't just about the guilt. The anxiety to prove himself king was at play here too. His brother, Daemon, was his heir by law, which some members of the court reminded him of. He denounced him as his heir, though. Also, Daemon would have been a wildly cruel king. Fine, so Daemon won't be his heir. Let a council decide, just as they did with you. Nah, a true king does what he wants. Later for everybody else, Rhaenyra is my heir. And here is the devastating irony. By allowing the mockery of Rhaenys to continue for years unchallenged, Viserys had already taught the court what he actually believed about women in power. You can't spend a decade letting the queen who never was be a punchline and then expect the lords of Westeros to take your daughter's claim seriously. The culture doesn't flip because you made a declaration. The culture is what you allowed it to become. And Viserys allowed it to become hostile to exactly the thing he is now asking it to accept. The lords who refused to truly accept Rhaenyra weren't defying Viserys. In a very real sense, they were following his lead. So, he originally feels guilt about Rhaenys, but does nothing because he needs to prove he's king. He needs to prove he's king, so he forces the C-section on Emma to have a male heir. It doesn't work. He feels guilty. He tries to ease his guilt and prove he's a king who can do what he wants by naming Rhaenyra heir. But because he didn't do anything about the first guilt, it's now biting him in the ass. The guilt and the need to prove himself king, they keep feeding into each other. Viserys' remarriage reeks of needing to prove himself king. He had Otto and others in his ear saying kings aren't single, especially if they don't have a male heir. You must remarry and have sons. This is ultimately why he remarries. He has to prove himself king and have those male heirs. Under other circumstances, it wouldn't have been an issue. But with him naming Rhaenyra heir, remarrying presents a big challenge to her claim. It was always going to be messed up, but he made it messier by marrying Alicent Hightower, her best friend, someone he's known since she was a child. It was 1, creepy, 2, certain to put a wedge between the two girls' relationship, 3, something else for him to feel guilty about, and it's another example of how him needing to prove himself king led to some guilt. And then he has sons, Aegon, Aemon, Daeron, the male heirs that Aemma died trying to give him. Now he has 2 sets of children, 2 families, 2 competing claims. And this is where his conflict avoidance, which has been present the whole time, quietly becomes catastrophic because Viserys never resolves it. He continues to tell Rhaenyra she's the heir. If the guilt around Aemma made him originally declare her as heir, then his guilt around marrying Alicent and having sons keeps him hanging on to Rhaenyra as heir. Shoot, that guilt also led to him not saying anything about Rhaenyra's children, who everyone knew were not from her marriage to Laenor. So some of that conflict avoidance was a manifestation of his various unprocessed guilts, but some of it was just good old conflict avoidance. He tells Alicent's faction what they want to hear. He lets everyone in his orbit believe what they need to believe. He tells himself that it's going to work out, that everyone will honor his wishes, that his words as king will be enough. He's managing his own anxiety by avoiding the conflict that would force him to truly confront what he's built. He could have resolved it, by making some unambiguous, public structured declaration that Rhaenyra is heir and not Aegon, but that would have required him to look directly at the crown he took from Rhaenys, at the wife he killed, at the daughter he put in an impossible situation, at the second family he created while telling his first child she would be queen. So he doesn't look. He looks away. He sits at the head of a table while 2 factions form around him, while the court quietly chooses sides, while the conditions for a civil war assemble themselves. All his fault. His unprocessed guilt, his need to prove his kinghood, continuously feeding off of each other, and now we're here at the Dance of Dragons. So what can we take from all this? Viserys' story is about the cost of unprocessed guilt. It's about the difference between feeling something and actually doing the work that the feeling is asking you to do. He felt guilt about Rhaenys, but he kept the crown and changed nothing. He felt guilt about Aemma, but he never processed that grief and guilt in a real way. He felt love for Rhaenyra, but he never built the structural conditions for her to actually succeed. He wanted peace between his families, but he never did the hard, uncomfortable, conflict-inviting work that peace actually requires. Guilt without accountability is just a feeling you carry. Unprocessed guilt causes a lot of harm. Consistently trying to prove yourself leads to bad decisions and in some cases causes a lot of harm. Viserys needed someone to be honest with him. He needed a space to actually grieve. He needed someone to hold him accountable. He needed therapy. And that's not to say that therapy would have prevented a Targaryen civil war. It probably would have happened at some point, but it might have prevented this Targaryen civil war. It's the most human kind of tragedy. Viserys is not a monster. He's not a villain. He's just a man who didn't do the work. And a lot of people died because of that. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. Definitely want to know what you all think. Like, subscribe if you want more of this. Share this with someone who might find it interesting. And if you're going through something yourself right now, I just want to say the work is worth doing. It's hard, It's uncomfortable, but it's worth it. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.